So for those of you who don't know, what we're doing today, this is kind of a last minute thing because that's how we do things. The Gadget Station project that we're working on now requires a certain joint at the top here. Let me just show you the picture real quick. You see that? Okay. Okay. Now at the corners here, you have a lot of choices for joinery. So, you know, where two pieces of wood meet, you could do dovetails, you could do box joints, you could do just a butt joint and peg it with some screws and maybe cap off, you know, with dowels, or maybe even use a square cap to cap off the screws. There's a lot of ways that you could do it, and my first instinct was dovetails, and I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you know, I'm kind of sick of dovetails. It's not really, it's sort of treated as the end-all be-all joint, and you know, it's really not. There's a lot of great ways to join wood that don't involve a dovetail jig or cutting them by hand. So I decided to try something different. Since this piece has a very Greene Greene element to it, I figured why not do something that's very Greene Greene-esque. Now, to be honest, I've never made a Greene Greene piece of furniture. I've never studied Greene Greene other than seeing pictures. So I may do things that are not the way you're supposed to do them, but I just am trying to reproduce what I've seen in photographs. So the joint for the top of the cabinet, if this were the top piece and this were the side piece, is going to look like this. So what you're looking at is basically, I guess you can call it a box joint, but it's only got 3 teeth to it, 3 fingers, like that. And the key here is that they stand proud of the surface on both the side and the top. Get a good shot? Yeah. And the other thing is they're rounded over on the corners. So it gives it a very just, I don't know, it's kind of a very neat interlocking look. And I've seen this in some Greene Greene pieces. A lot of times the base of a structure will be designed like this. Drawers will have this sort of joinery on it. And the good thing is it's incredibly easy to make. So that's really the goal today, is we're going to take 2 more pieces. This is just alder. It's not ideal because it's very, very soft, and you'll see why it's not ideal in a minute. In fact, I'll show you why it's not ideal right now. Okay, so there's the joint. Now you see inside there? My chisel, although it's sharp, tore the crap out of that because it's very soft, so the fibers tend to compress instead of slicing. Even though the joint comes together real nice and it's completely hidden, I'd rather not have that if I could avoid it. Okay, so very simple joint, but it's going to be integral in keeping this thing together. The other thing, which we may or may not cover, because obviously I haven't done it here, is I will be pegging this. I'll be putting a screw in here, like that, and then 2 more here and here, okay? And I'll cap them off with a square ebony plug. Not that big. That would look funny. But we'll cap it off with a square ebony plug, and that really is sort of the essence of the Greene Greene look. So this joint just worked so much better for what I was trying to do, and it made more sense for the piece, thematically, I guess. So here are 2 of our pieces of alder. And I'm going to start by laying out what would be the male.
Will the plug be flush or proud?
The plug will be proud. The great thing about the Greene Greene stuff is everything is about, it seems to be about textures and different planes. You know, so the whole piece is not flat. Nothing is really flush. It's all about stuff that's in different planes. So when you look at some Greene Greene furniture, you'll notice that all the profiles and everything, it's just very, you can't even figure out a good word for it, but it's a lot of stepped joints and things like that that just give it more texture and life.
Someone asked, why are you using screws and not just dowels?
You could use dowels. You could just use screws. One of the reasons is I want to cap it off with a square cap. And I don't necessarily want to use a square dowel. And I could always drill the hole, drive in a wooden dowel, and then cap it off with a ebony plug. But I could also use, because it's going to be completely hidden, I'd rather just use a screw that I feel is going to be a little bit stronger, and the piece is going to have some weight on it, and it's going to have to support its own weight as it hangs. So there's nothing wrong with using either way, whatever your preference is. In fact, I'm not 100% decided that that's what I'm going to do, but most likely I will use screws. Okay, so we're going to make the male, all right? So essentially, we have to, first of all, decide how big the middle piece is going to be and how big the two outside pieces are. Now this is 5 inches across, and I like the middle one to have a little bit more substance than the outer two, just to be slightly larger. I just kind of like the way that look comes out when it's like that. So the middle piece is 2 inches, and the outer ones are 1.5 inches. So I'm going to set my adjustable square to 1.5. And on the end of my workpiece here, I'm just going to scribe my line. It's easier if I'm down on here. You got a good view of that? Okay. Okay, there's 1.5 here. Flip it over, do the 1.5 on the other side. Now here's the thing, I'm going to use the table saw for all these. Now if you were using a hand saw, you might approach this a little bit differently. For instance, when I establish the back end, you might want to use a marking gauge or something so that you could split the grain. I'm not really going to have to worry about that too much, but maybe we'll use it anyway. But this actually is, if you're going to cut it by hand, this is a pretty good joint to do that with. A great joint to learn on. Now here's the other thing. Normally, if you're making dovetails and you want these two boards to be perfectly flush when they're joined together, you could put your board like this, and then you just trace, or you get your knife and you trace across. But we want them to stand proud, remember? We want them about 1/4 inch proud. So I need to add 1/4 inch to that distance. So just for fun, I'll put my board up nice and even with the other board, like so. And this does not have to be perfect, and that's why I'm being so sort of relaxed about it. Okay, so now I take my adjustable square, and I'm going to add 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to trace that 1/4 inch all the way down. Now you could have obviously just measured, so you don't have two lines to worry about, but that line is not interesting to us anymore. Okay, so what I really strongly urge you do is mark the parts that are going to be cut and what's not going to be cut. So on this particular piece, those go and those go. Now on the other piece, the only thing we know, or that we want to worry about at this point, is this back line. I want to use this piece itself, once this is cut, to trace just like you would with dovetails when you take your tails, put it on the other piece and mark the location of the tails. I want to use the piece itself to make the markings for the female end. But one thing I do have is the depth, which I'm going to transfer here since my, adjustable square is already set.
Someone asked what kind of square that is.
This one is, I believe this is one that Lee Valley sells. It's very...
Is it starlet?
No, it's not a starlet. It's very close to a starlet though, but it's made by Lee Valley, and it's just a little 4-incher, which is actually my favorite size for just everyday use. Okay, so for now, let's leave the female untouched. That sounds funny. And let's head over to the table saw, and we can start cutting these. And again, you could use a hand saw to do this. It'd be relatively simple, but I'm going to try and do it a little bit faster today. So, do I make a full-scale model, prototype for all my projects? Of certain things, yes, but not of everything. For instance, the legs on this piece were something that I really needed to see in 3D space before making a determination on whether it was something that would look right. I mean, this picture is good. This picture gives me my proportions. I'm happy with it, but it's not the same as seeing it in person. And plus, I couldn't draw in SketchUp what I wanted to see in person. So I took some blanks. Again, I've got a bunch of alder sitting around, so it's great for making test pieces. And I actually cut a sample leg out of the alder. So this, in 3D space now, I can sort of evaluate the shape. I can hold it up to sample pieces and see what the look is going to be like, and if it's something that I really like, if I want to go with it or make any changes. So I'm able to add all these little extra angles and adornments to it. The little cut at the top was something I decided to add in. And it's pretty cool. I like it. But I wouldn't have been able to get that far with a pencil and paper. So this is a full-scale mock-up of the leg, but I'm not going to do a full-scale mock-up of the entire piece. Yesterday, I came into the shop to work out the joinery on this piece. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I came up with this idea. So I haven't really had much time to refine the process, but there are certainly a lot of smoother ways you could probably pull this joint off. And if you have any ideas, feel free to yell them out, but that's probably, if it seems a little disorganized, that would be why. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this is just use a standard miter gauge. Well, any standard miter gauge would work. In fact, where is my one? The one that came with the saw has a much bigger face on it, and that's going to be advantageous here because we need to run the pieces over the table saw upright, and the bigger the face is, the more support it's going to give you. Mine is actually relatively short, so yeah, we'll work with it. So the thing is, this line is a guide. It's not absolute. You know, we don't have to absolutely hit it perfectly because whatever this is, we're going to transfer to the other piece. It's the relative relationship of these two pieces that's important, not the absolute spot that this line's located. So I'm really not all that nervous about hitting that perfectly. I don't really worry about it that much. Okay, so all I want to do is make a single cut to establish the side of what's going to essentially be the tenon. But here's another thing to save us time. That tenon is going to be dead center, right? It should be dead center. And the best way to do that is to utilize our fence as a guide. Okay, so I'm going to bring the fence right up to the workpiece. And in fact, I just realized that I wasn't thinking properly, what I should have been doing the whole time. I just get so nervous. I should have had the fence here and made my adjustment this way. So you adjust your fence until you are right on that line, which makes life a whole lot easier. So excuse that blunder. And now I just bring the piece while keeping it up against the fence, bring the piece to my miter gauge. I'm sitting here wondering why this is so much more difficult than it was yesterday. It's because I didn't do it right. Okay, so it is. It's so nerve-wracking. All right, so now the fence is the guide. We will cover in the next one, I know someone's going to say we probably shouldn't have this piece wedged between the fence and the blade. And in this case, that piece of material isn't coming off yet. We're just cutting a curve, and the piece is going to be stable, so we don't have to worry about that. But I'll show you a trick. No kickback, no kickback. Okay? So it's clamped in place. The great thing about clamping it is nothing's going to move. So you're really eliminating the possibilities of kickback here. But the clamp, absolutely critical. Now I'm letting it go. I have no desire to pull that back through while that blade's running. So what I've essentially done here is made the first cut, and I let the table saw define my line for me on the side of that. For lack of a better word, I'm calling it a tenon. Capiche?
You just cut some wood.
Finally. Okay, so I'm going to turn it around this way now to get the other cut. And again, that was why I was kind of laughing at myself before, because this is how you get a perfectly centered finger there by using the fence this way. So again, same routine. Push against the fence, clamp it in place, and make the cut. Okay. So now we have those two lines established. Now, this piece, before I transfer the marks to the female piece, I want to make these two cuts. Oops, sorry. Okay, we have to now remove this material here. Okay, so the good thing about this is the table saw is establishing our cut lines. So they're going to be nice and smooth, nice and straight. I'm going to adjust the height of the blade. And again, I don't want to go right onto it because at this point, I can mangle the tenon a little bit, and I don't want to do that. I just want to remove enough material that this little piece pops off. And there we go. That's probably good enough. You see that?
I see it.
Now we also have to align the fence. Same thing as before. And again, this is where this cut will determine how much the material sits above the surface. So we were going for that 1/4 inch, but if we're slightly more or less than a 1/4 inch, it's not the end of the world. I feel pretty good about the location there. Now, people were talking about trapping the workpiece. That's exactly what we're going to do right now. If I clamp this in place, make this cut, and that little chunk is going to stop right here. And what's going to happen to that? We're going to have a bullet that's going to shoot back. Okay? So had I made that cut, we would be in trouble. And that's why I made this little, very simple plywood little fixture here. It's 3 pieces of plywood, screw it together, and just filled the holes. This side has, these are from Rockler. They're those little T-bolt jig dealies, okay? I use that, fits right over the fence, and I could tighten it in. In fact, you don't necessarily even need one. As long as it's a good slip fit, you might not even need these. Simplest thing you can do is use a piece of wood that's clamped to the fence. So the idea here is we're going to set the distance before the blade so that when we make our cut, we'll go through, and by the time we get to the blade, that little cutoff piece will sit in between the fence and the blade with a little bit of room to move around, and that's going to reduce our chances of it flying back in our face. Okay, so I'm going to tighten this down. I'm about 1.5 inches ahead of the blade. Okay, now we're going to reset the fence. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly make this adjustment here, and we should be ready to rock and roll. Okay, so I've got the workpiece nice and tight. I've got the blade lined up. Bless you. And now we're comfortable that as soon as we move past the guard here, that little cutoff piece is going to hang out there. Now remember, it could still fly. You could still have a little bit of a projectile here. So it's, in this case, you'll see that I really make an effort to stand out of the way. Eye protection, you know, put on a face shield if you feel really nervous about it. But in most cases, it just kind of hangs out and sits between the blade and the fence. Okay, so here we go, next cut. Okay, and there is the little cutoff. And for anyone who didn't see, the cutoff kind of just hung out here for a little bit and then moved out to the to this side of the stop. Okay. Now that cut, you can see, is nice and smooth, just as smooth as the other one, and we've only got a little bit of material here to remove at the corner, and that's going to be no problem to remove with a chisel. All right? So, let's do the other one.
So it says there's no projectile with a sled. Why aren't you using a sled?
Well, because I, I disassembled my sled. Disassemble. Yeah, I took my sled apart because I just wasn't using it anymore. And I can make the same cut as before, same exact thing. This is good for barbecue. Okay, so that's the male, and we'll worry about cleaning up the details on that later. Okay, so this process now is not exactly as critical as when you're doing dovetails, let's say, and you have to get those lines perfectly because you really have one shot to nail it. This one, if things are slightly off, I could just nudge it over a little bit and take another little bit off. Maybe I could just use a chisel to pare it down if it's not perfect. But I'm going to take this piece here, okay, and transfer my lines over. Now, in fact, we're going to do the same type of thing where we're going to have an automatically centered cut. So normally, you would want to put them in the position that they're going to actually be assembled. In this case, since everything is dead center, I don't have to do that. I could just stack them like this.
Can I get something?
What are you going to do?
Hi, Vic.
Oh, Vic's there? What other famous people do we have in the
Andy,
chat room?
Bama,
Andy Hobbs.
Dan, and
How's Norm?
Norm.
Okay, Andy has a dog named Norm, and he's adorable, and he has giant ears that can help him fly. Okay, so I'm going to take these pieces. I'm making sure with my fingers that they're nice and even on the front and the sides. Nice sharp pencil, and I'm just going to strike my line across. And again, these are just guidelines. The centerpiece is what we're getting rid of. So when we mark this, we actually want to remove the material right up to this pencil line. See how easy it is to get confused on this crap? These crap. Okay, so our kerf, we want to run inside here, like so. Make sense? Good. And a lot of times in this, I will actually do a sort of sneak fit. I will make adjustments until I get it to fit perfectly. The other thing that you can do, this is where there's a lot of variability and preference in how you handle this. A lot of times, I'll just make one curve cut, make the second curve cut, and I'll come back with a coping saw, remove the excess, and then use a chisel to clean up the inside. Once you make these two curve cuts, there's other things that you can do. You can go to the bandsaw. You can actually just continue to use the table saw, and I think you guys have probably seen Norm do this 100 times, where you just make 7 or 8 different curve cuts and remove the bulk of the material that way as well. So whatever you want to do, maybe you have a dado blade and you want to go that route, although a dado with the grain in this direction, you need a lot of support on the back of the board to avoid some major tear out. Okay, so I'm adjusting the height again, just under the line. We're going to use, no matter what we do, we're going to use chisels to clean everything up. So I wouldn't worry too much about nailing that line perfectly. Okay, and now, once again, I'm not removing any pieces, I'm just doing a curve cut, so I'm going to go right with the fence. Here's another reason I try to avoid using this thing sometimes. I need a new one. This one, the face is not as even as it used to be, so when I reference off of it, sometimes the top piece sticks out a little bit further, and the major flaw here with this one was putting the bottom piece this way and the top piece on top of it. Ideally, the outside face of a jig like this should just be one solid piece, so if anything, I should put another auxiliary piece on the outside. Right up to the line. That's pretty darn close. This is alder too. This is another example of what I was talking about with the dovetails. Because it's softer, you can sometimes make something fit that you would not be able to do with hardwood, with a more dense wood. So you can kind of get an unrealistic idea for how much forgiveness there is in the joint. And that's my patented chin pressure move. Okay, right up against the fence, tighten down, zick lamp. Let's make our cut. So that one hit a very annoying loud tone, didn't it? Okay. Let's flip it over and hit the other side. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it depends on how good you are with a handsaw. The real thing is, the way to think about it, I mean, yeah, you certainly could have used a handsaw. It just depends on how consistent you are with your hand sawing technique. Remember, you're going to have to do this 4 times on the case. So if you're not that comfortable with it, I mean, it's a great, like I said, it is a great exercise to do with hand tools because it's relatively simple, it's not as complicated as dovetails, and it's a good place to get practice. I'm doing it with the table saw because I want to. Yeah, because honestly, when I'm doing this, I really am going to want to bang out 4 of them quickly and get them finished.
So I asked, what do you plan to do with the real pieces since they will be much longer than the sample boards that you're doing right now?
They won't be that much longer. They're about 20 inches, so they might be double. And in that case, it's really not that much of an issue. What I probably will do, though, is with this particular gauge, as I clamp, the pieces are not sitting as flat to the table as I want them to, so they're kind of pulling back a little bit, and I don't want that. So what I'm probably going to do is either get I don't even know where it is. I've got a couple miter gauges, but get a miter gauge with a auxiliary fence on it that's dead on 90 degrees to the surface of the table, and that's going to keep me a lot more supported. And also, by having a higher fence, when I have a taller workpiece, it's going to be more stable that way. This is just, like I said, for the practice cuts to establish the joinery itself. So yeah, you could definitely make improvements on what I'm doing right here. This is awfully short. There's not that much difference here between dovetails and what we're doing in terms of the options that you have. When you do dovetails and you need to remove the space between the tails and pins, you know, there's tons of ways you could do that. The bottom line is you just need to get rid of the material so you can come back with your chisel and chop it so it's nice and clean and straight. You know, so this is really no different. There's just as many ways to accomplish it doing it with this. It's just personal preference. I've seen David Marks do an entire set of dovetails on his show using the bandsaw for the whole thing. And, you know, some people think that that's crazy, but it worked for him and, you know, seemed to be a decent idea. So did anyone decide what they want me to do to remove the waste? Anyone care? With my teeth, maybe? All I'm really doing on the bandsaw is making cuts like this and getting myself more and more access so that eventually I could just make a straight cut across the back. And I'm staying away from the line still. Okay, that's all. Super easy. Okay, I didn't really talk about it before, but I did mention that when you make that first cut, if you need to make an adjustment and just take a little bit more off, you have to decide how much is close enough before you want to come back and just use a chisel to pare it away and make the fit absolutely perfect. But usually you can get pretty darn close, and without removing all that material, it's really easy if you have a good light source to hold it up to a light source. And you're not really going to be able to see this with a camera, but if you hold it up, you can really see, even though I didn't have all this material removed yet, I could just kind of eyeball it with one eye, and by looking at how much light peeks through on both sides, I'm able to tell whether that thing was going to fit. So I didn't even mention it, and I probably should have, but you could see the fit of the tenon, or in this case, the male and the female here, is pretty darn good, okay? That's kind of what we're looking for. Honestly, I'd like it to be a little bit tighter than that, but it's good enough for now. So the first thing I want to do, let's take the male. This one's going to be easy. Put him in the workbench. And this is where you'll see the fact that soft woods can kind of be a pain in the butt to work with here. So I'm just going to grab ooh, not that one. That one needs to be, that one needs some surgery. Yeah, Nicole did Locks of Love, is that what it's called? Yeah. Where she donated her hair, which was really cool. Okay, so the material here, this is just real simple. There's just a little chunk right in the corner. So with the grain running vertically, if we start chopping this way first, you have a chance that you could just split that board right down, which is not the goal. So what I like to do is come in across the grain and then start severing the fibers so that by the time I do my vertical cut, the material's all out of the way. So I use the surface here as a reference. You may not even need to use any weight on this. You could probably just start to kind of chip it away if you want to go like that. But you want to reference the flat side of your chisel right against the surface that's already dead flat. Just make sure you keep your fingers behind your cutting surface. Just a few light taps is really all it takes. Once it's loosened, you usually just pry it out of place. With this one, we now just have to chisel to a line. Now I'm going to rush this. I would probably be a little bit more picky if I had the time. This is where a lot of times if you have, sorry, I'm moving around here. And like I said, I'm rushing through a lot of this, so things that I normally would do, I may have forgotten to do. This is where, if you're using your little dealy whacker, which is the official name for this, you can put the line here and cut across the grain. What that does is not only stops you from getting any tear out, but the most important thing that it does is it gives you a little channel in which you can put your chisel into and rest the chisel in there, and you could straighten that line out with no problem. This line needs to be on both sides. And the reason, because if you start chopping on one side and you go all the way down, if we start cleaning that up and go all the way down, chances are we are not going to be dead straight. And I've never been able to get a cut like that dead straight, so I'm not even going to bother trying. I want my border line here, I want it on both sides. Okay, so now we have a mark on both ends. Last time I did this, when I made the other joint, I did cut across. This time I avoided it, and I'll show you why. When you do that, you'll notice people who hand-cut dovetails, a lot of times, some people want to get rid of this, other people are proud of it. You see the extra lines? Well, this side, yeah. You see the cut lines that go across? A lot of times those lines are the mark of, hand-cut, handcrafted work, so people leave them there. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted them or not. So this time I'm trying one without, and I'm kind of regretting it because it is a really good guide for telling you where to place the chisel. Absolutely. If you are uncertain about your ability to hold it straight, get yourself, and I'm glad someone brought this up because I was going to, and I forgot. Get yourself a nice big block of 8/4 that's been milled perfectly square, at least on one corner, the face and this end here. And then lay that on top of the board. It's even helpful sometimes if you put a little dab of hot melt glue or maybe double wrapped sandpaper, something to stop it from sliding, give it a little friction. Place that right along your line and clamp the heck out of it so it doesn't move. Then all you need to do is reference your chisel on the back of that surface and then tap away. It's an awesome technique. In the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of blow through this real quick. All right, so this is just a matter of putting the chisel right on the line and going for it. A lot of times, when I don't have a line as a guide, I will put it on the line and I'm going to slowly, as I bring it vertical, I'm putting downward pressure. Okay, because I want to give myself a little bit of divot, a little divot there that will help me keep this in position. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard. So there is a very light trace line. The other option would have been to take my adjustable square as I went across, and I could have gotten a knife and used the knife to cut the line. And of course, the other option beyond that would have been to use this guy before the whole thing got to this point. So now that that light line is established, I'm actually going to take the hammer and just make sure we establish that line even more. Now, when you're cutting these, it's okay not to be dead straight, perfectly vertical. If you are, do you have a good view of the whole chisel?
Yes.
Okay. If you're out this way, you're not going to get enough material out. But if you are perfectly straight, that's great. But I always find that if you aim for perfectly straight, you're going to end up one side or the other. You're going to be either this way or that way slightly. So I like to have my error and purposely put my error in the direction that's going to be useful to me. So I always tilt a little bit in toward the material because it's okay if that material is slightly hollowed out. It's the end that we're most concerned with because that's where the fit is going to either be obviously on or obviously off. So you'll see that I do just a little bit tilt inward. Okay, and what I like to do is go about halfway. Not all the way down, just about half. And you can see I didn't go all the way, well, it's just about halfway here. And we stopped right about there. And you can see where the fibers compress and pull out. So we'll flip it over, I'll get it clamped in place, and then we will take a break. I like it to face me. And make no mistake about it, there are definitely more accurate ways to do this, making sure that that scribe line is perfect. And that's this Veritas wheel marker gauge thing is great for that purpose. Right now I'm just kind of relying on some manual dexterity and a little bit of luck. Okay. Well, in fact, you know what? I'm going to finish this up while we're doing a break, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to just basically repeat the same exact thing I did on the other side. Okay. So I think we could probably just, everybody's got the idea here. A little bit more. Okay. Now, where is my other piece? Okay, so that is a pretty decent fit. Got a little burning on that one that we would have to sand out here. So now the key is, and this is the fun part, to round over all of these edges so that we get this type of appearance. Okay, and any way you're comfortable doing this, that's the way you want to do it. For me, I like using cabinet maker's rasp. Okay, and I'm going to do all 4 sides. So I usually start by giving myself a 45-degree chamfer. Okay, so I hold the tool 45 degrees to the edge. I'll do the same thing on this side. It's a little awkward doing it backwards, but. Okay, and the great part about this stuff is, when you do this by hand, it's a lot more forgiving than you might think. You have to kind of skew on an angle here so you don't harm this other piece. And do the same thing on this side. Now, when I'm carving like this, as much as it might be better to have my eye protection on, it's very hard to see, especially when you're sweating through that, and it really distorts my vision. So that would be why I'm not wearing them, in case anyone's wondering. Okay, so once you establish a chamfer, in fact, that's not that bad looking. Like if you really wanted to keep that look, that looks kind of cool. So it just depends on what kind of look you want to establish, but that's not bad. Okay. But what we're going for is a rounded look. So at this point, you have a 45-degree chamfer, or roughly. And now we went from one corner to essentially 2 corners. We've got a corner up here and a corner down here. So I want to break both of those corners now. Let's start by breaking the one up top. And let's break the one below. By doing this, it's kind of systematic, and although carving and things like that is, you know, freeform carving is really, you get the impression that it might be a lot more self-control and a little bit more artistic ability is required to do it. The truth is, it's just a series of more mechanical movements than anything, at least the way I break it down. Okay, same thing on this side. Break the top. And you can see how if you continue in this pattern, breaking each line down, you'd eventually end up with a semicircle. Okay, do the corner. Do the bottom now. Okay, so we have what looks like a rough semicircle. I just take a sanding block, in this case it's one of my flexible sanding strips, and I'm going to round it over like this. So it's going to be, oh, that one's kind of messed up. Long strokes that are going to blend all of those little corners that we essentially created. Okay, now you're going to have to fine sand this at some point so that you don't see all the scratches, but I'm just going to kind of rush through it really quickly. Now I suppose, if you're really clever, I don't know that you'd be able to get the sides, but you could potentially use a round over bit and route it so that it is like a perfect semicircle, but I don't know. That's not fun. See? I'm jacking it up. I guess someone could say it's also not fun to not use a handsaw to do the original cuts, so to each his own.
I want to ask, wouldn't a block plane give finer surface than a file?
It would, but it wouldn't do this in the way that I want to do it. I really like using the cabinet maker's files for rounding over and things like that. If you were using a block plane, you would have to do a series of cuts across the grain that could very easily lead to chip out in the corners. So if you're real good and you have control over that corner and chew a little bit of material away from the corner first before doing your strokes across the grain, you certainly could use it. But I really like the sort of, doing this by hand gives it a certain hand-carved, I mean, it's even and it's consistent, but there's still a hand-carved essence to it. And it may just be little tiny imperfections that create that. And I really like that look. All right, so there is the design. Okay? Now the one thing I did on this one, I didn't give myself, of course rushing, things like this are going to happen. There's a little, it's acceptable, I guess that's okay. I want mine to be more proud than that. I want to see more of the side. Like if you look at the other one, it's a little bit more substantial. I like that better. To me, it makes more of a punchy sort of point. So that's it in a nutshell. I think if we had time, we would be able to go into the next part. But as you can see with my practice boards, I haven't hammered out that process. I'm probably just going to use the hollow chisel mortising chisels, since they're four-sided, and basically punch through. That's going to establish the plug area for the ebony plugs. Okay, just like any other chisel. In fact, I don't want to use that hammer to do that because it'll mess up the face.
You don't want to use that one either?
Not that one either, because that'll mess up the chisel. All right, I'm just going to use this little wooden guy. So you just try and keep it straight. And really all you need to do, take it in far enough to establish the borders. Now this is a tiny one. I mean, I don't even know that I have a chisel small enough to handle that. Yeah, I do. So at this point, with that perfectly square surface established, you can just go in and remove the extra material so that you can then put a square plug in there. The other thing we're going to do is, because I'm going to screw through there, I'm going to pre-drill a hole and then drive a screw through and then cap the end with a plug. But really the hardest part of that operation is getting a perfectly square, four-cornered square in that location, and this is just one really quick way to do it. And that's really all there is to it.